New York, 1997. The entire city is a walled maximum security prison. The bridges are mined. The rivers are patrolled. And the United States Police Force has everything under control.
I'm going in.
One man must go in where no man has ever gotten out. His nightmare has just begun.
Heard you were dead.
The greatest escape of them all is about to blow the future apart. Escape from New York.
The early 70s were all about dark, dystopian visions of the future, inspired by the chaos and crisis dominating the headlines. Movies like The Omega Man, Soylent Green, and THX 1138 painted a grim picture of what could happen if we didn't get our act together, whether it was biological warfare, overpopulation, or government control. The message was clear. Humanity's best days might already be behind us. Fast forward to the summer of 1981, and the tone had totally shifted. Films like Clash of the Titans, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Superman 2 offered up some much-needed escapism with classic good versus evil battles. But then there was this 80s flick, which took us to the far-off future of 1997. In this world, Manhattan is a nightmarish, anarchic prison island, and the only thing that separates the hero from the rest of the criminals is his mission to rescue the president. Full of shadowy characters and shady alliances, the hero, by default, is really just a man looking out for himself. He might do the right thing, but only if it benefits him in the end. So prepare the glider plane, check your neck for injections, and don't forget your eye patch as Nicholas, Pepin, and I discuss Escape from New York from 1981 on this episode of the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast. All right, welcome in 80s Flick lovers. I'm Tim Williams, creator and host of the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast. Thanks so much for joining us today. Get ready to embark on a nostalgic journey through the most iconic films of the decade that brought us unforgettable adventures, epic music, and classic one-liners. We're thrilled to have you join us, and if you're as excited as we are, be sure to leave us a stellar 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. No matter which podcasting platform you're listening to, go ahead and hit that follow or subscribe button. We want to hear from you, so dive into the conversation on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube. And if you're feeling generous and want to show your support, check us out on buymeacoffee.com. Every little bit counts and goes a long way in keeping our podcast alive. Plus, make sure to explore 80sflickflashback.com and our TeePublic store for some totally awesome merch and original designs. Now, let's get this party started. Welcome back to the show. Glad to have him. He's one of our favorite co-hosts from Pop Culture Roulette, Mr. Nicholas Pepin. How you doing, Nicholas?
It's all right. The rumors of my demise have been greatly exaggerated.
Good one. Good one. So, we're going to talk about Escape from New York from 1981. John Carpenter, which of all the directors that we've covered on the podcast, he might be one of the most prolific that we've covered because we've done The Thing, we've done Big Trouble in Little China, we've done Christine. Now we're doing Escape from New York. I think the only thing that's left is The Fog, and then maybe what's the kind of sequel he did? Something about the darkness. I should have looked it up.
He did a lot of movies. I was looking through his catalog today, and I'm like, I've seen a lot of his movies.
Yeah.
I mean, I covered The Fog over on Horror Through the Decades over on the Media Podsmash channel.
Right.
But if you ever want to do it, like I've watched that one.
Yeah, I just got that one on Blu-ray a couple of months ago. Yeah, I found like a 2-pack. It was The Fog and The Howling together. It was a Screen Queens edition because it had two pretty decent horror movies. So, but yeah, I watched it. I didn't watch it this past Halloween, but I watched it Halloween of 2023. So it's still somewhat fresh on my mind. But yeah, we'll get to that one. But Escape from New York, I will say up front, this is not one that I am as familiar with. It's not one that I watched a lot, but I'll let you go. When did you see Escape from New York for the very first time?
About a week ago. Somehow I've never seen. I went and saw Escape from LA in the movie theaters. I remember going to see. Right. But I have no idea why I would have gone and seen Escape from LA in the movie theater when I never saw Escape from New York. I mean, I've been aware of Escape from New York for a long time. Like the movie poster is iconic.
Oh,
I would say the movie poster might be more iconic than the movie itself.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Sure.
But I seem to remember trying to sit down and watch it like 10, 15 years ago, but for whatever reason, like I got distracted or something happened and I couldn't finish it because there were parts of it that I was like, but until about a week ago, I had never sat down and watched it in its entirety.
I think I might have seen like a TV version, maybe like you. I may have not have seen the whole thing. I might be caught like bits and pieces because there were certain parts of it that I kind of remembered, or maybe I'd like seen them in like clip montages or something about movies of the 80s. And of course, Snake Plissken is a pretty iconic character. So, we've seen his image a lot anyway. I did not see Escape from LA in the theaters. I remember when it came out, and I remember it bombing pretty bad at the theater. But it's kind of one that I kind of always wanted to see. But because 81, I was definitely too young to see it. But when it came out, being an R-rated movie, even though it's not a terrible, it's not a super adult R-rated. I mean, it's got some language and some violence, but there's really not that much else in it.
I think had this movie come out in the system that happened a few years later, it would have been PG-13.
Yeah, probably so. It has a very 70s aesthetic. Like it feels much more like a 70s movie than an 80s movie to me. Like even when I mentioned to my wife that that's what we're watching, it's like, oh, did that come out in the 80s? And I'm like 81, like it barely got in there. So it still feels very 70s to me.
Yes, I would agree.
Yeah. So I watched it for the first time in the last 5 years. And I think I watched it kind of online, like on my phone. So it really wasn't like a great viewing experience. I mean, not that it's like, super high tech. A lot of the effects don't really hold up as well now, but it was better to watch it when I watched it today, like on a bigger screen to kind of see more of the picture and some of the effects and stuff. But yeah, so I want to ask you how long it's been since you rewatched it, because you literally just watched it twice, right? Did you watch it again?
Yeah, the last time I rewatched it this afternoon.
Right. All right, well, let's jump into story origin and pre-production. So John Carpenter, who talked about, originally wrote the screenplay for Escape from New York in 1976, which probably gives you that 70s vibe. In the aftermath of Nixon's Watergate scandal, Carpenter said the whole feeling of the nation was one of real cynicism about the president. He wrote the screenplay, but no studio wanted to make it because, according to Carpenter, it was too violent, too scary, and too weird. He had been inspired by the film Death Wish, which was very popular at the time. He did not agree with the film's philosophy, but he liked how it conveyed, quote unquote, the sense of New York as a kind of jungle. And he wanted to make a science fiction film along those lines, which he'd already done kind of New York as a jungle with Assault on Precinct 13, which I think came out late 70s. So he did that one before this one.
Yeah, I think so.
International film investors agreed to provide 50% of the budget, and Goldcrest Films signed a co-financing deal with him. He got $7 million to make this movie, which was the highest budget he had been given to make a movie up to that point.
Yeah, I mean, he knows how to make a movie on a little budget.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Because, I mean, even though to think if you were doing that today, that'd be like a $200 million budget, kind of movie. But, to do that movie on $7 million is impressive.
I mean, because it did have some pretty cool effects, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But it does still feel kind of B movie-ish in some sections. It's a little, we'll get there. So But Carpenter had just made Dark Star, but no one wanted to hire him as a director, so he assumed he would make it in Hollywood as a screenwriter. The filmmaker went on to do other successful films with the intention of making Escape later. After the success of Halloween, Avco Embassy signed producer Deborah Hill and him to a 2-picture deal. The first film from this contract was The Fog, which came out in 1980. Initially, the second film he was going to make to finish the contract was The Philadelphia Experiment, but because of script writing problems, Carpenter rejected it in favor of this project. However, Carpenter felt something was missing and recalls, "This was basically a straight action film, and at one point I realized it really doesn't have this kind of crazy humor that people from New York would expect to see." So he brought in Nick Castle, a friend from his film school days at University of Southern California, who also played the Shape in Halloween. Castle invented the cabbie character and actually came up with the film's ending.
Okay.
The film's setting proved to be a potential problem for Carpenter, who needed to create a decaying, semi-destroyed version of New York City on a shoestring budget. The film's production designer, Joe Alves, and he rejected shooting on location in New York because it would be too hard to make it look like a destroyed city. Carpenter suggested shooting on a movie backlot, but Alves nixed that idea because the texture of a real street is not like a backlot. They sent Barry Bernardi, their location manager and associate producer, on a sort of all-expense-paid trip across the country looking for the worst city in America. That's what Deborah Hill remembers. Bernardi suggested East St. Louis, Illinois, because it was filled with old buildings that exist in New York now and have that seedy, rundown quality that the team was looking for. East St. Louis, sitting across the Mississippi River from the more prosperous St. Louis, Missouri, had entire neighborhoods burned out in 1976 during a massive urban fire. Hill said in an interview, block after block was burnt out rubble. In some places, there was absolutely nothing, so you could see 3 and 4 blocks away. So they chose to shoot it mainly in St. Louis, Illinois.
Which, to my knowledge, East St. Louis isn't any better now than it was in
1981 or 1980. Yeah. You don't hear that one on the most visited cities in the country list too much.
Because wasn't East St. Louis the joke in Vacation?
It might have been, yeah.
Isn't that the city they got robbed? Or
I think it might be, yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're right. Yep. Yeah. How do we get back to the interstate? What you gonna do is no, sorry, but yeah, good scene. Carpenter was interested in creating 2 distinct looks for the movie. He said one was the police state, high tech, lots of neon, a United States dominated by underground computers. That was easy to shoot compared to the Manhattan Island prison sequences, which had few lights, mainly torch lights, like old-style England. Certain matte paintings were rendered by James Cameron, who was at the time a special effects artist with Roger Corman's New World Pictures. Cameron was also one of the directors of photography on the film. As Snake pilots the glider into the city, 3 screens on his control panel display animations of the landing target on the World Trade Center and surrounding buildings. Carpenter initially wanted high-tech computer graphics, which were very expensive, even for such a simple animation. The effects crew filmed the miniature model set of New York City they used for other scenes under black light, reflective tape placed along every edge of the model buildings. Only the tape is visible and appears to be in a 3-dimensional wireframe animation. So that's how they did that kind of look, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, well, I watched the movie and I was like, okay, whatever. And then I read all of the stuff and I read that. And when I watched it again today, I was like, oh, okay, I can tell.
Yeah.
But like when I first saw it, it didn't stick out to me that it wasn't a computer animation.
Exactly.
So I really, good job on the practical effects, and it still holds that part of the movie still holds up.
Yeah. I mean, there's certain things like you can tell, just like most 80s movies, you can tell it's special effects, but it's not terrible. I mean, we saw worse special effects in 90s movies.
Yes.
The 80s Flick Flashback Podcast will return after these messages.
What seems to be the problem, pal?
There's just so much pain in the world, so many issues. I don't think I can bear it.
Hell, friendo, it sounds like you could use a dose of pop culture roulette.
Pop culture roulette? What's that? Some sort of pop culture themed podcast or something?
That's right, sonny boy. When hope seems far, dive into some PCR.
But I already get my entertainment news from Variety.
Huh, that's pretty good. If you're a chucklehead, PCR gives you news you need, condensed, unfiltered, and raw, from three nerds who know a little something about something.
Wow, okay, sign me up.
That's the spirit. Pop Culture Roulette. New episodes every Monday, available on all major podcast directories.
All right, well, let's jump into casting. A studio executive pressured John Carpenter to cast a seasoned tough guy actor for the role of Snake. Their preferences included Chuck Norris, Nick Nolte, Tommy Lee Jones, and Charles Bronson. Carpenter didn't like these choices because he thought Bronson, who was 60 at the time, was too old. The others were too typecast or simply not right for the part. At the time, 29-year-old Kurt Russell was best known for lighthearted Disney roles such as the Computer Wore Tennis Shoes from 1969, and had no experience playing gritty action roles. However, Carpenter had directed Kurt Russell in Elvis in 1979, and they had a pretty positive relationship working together. Producer Deborah Hill agreed his youth, looks, athleticism, and freshness to the action genre made him the ideal choice for the part. Can't really see anybody else in that role at this point.
Not anymore, no. I mean, he's kind of taken that role so much that it'd be hard to, think of anybody from that era that could have done it instead.
Mm-hmm. I did read some other reports that like Clint Eastwood was thought of, which is why, Kurt Russell decided to give him kind of the Eastwood talking, like the speech patterns and stuff. So, which I didn't notice as much this time. Like it's clear, which we talked about in the Big Trouble in Little China episode, that he was definitely going for John Wayne in that. And it's a little bit more pronounced. And this one, I think it's just, it doesn't, I don't feel like he's trying to be Clint Eastwood. I think he's just talking more soft like Eastwood does, but I think it works for the character.
Yeah, to say I never once thought, oh, is that Clint Eastwood? No,
no.
There's another accent we'll get to, I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh yeah. But he also, like, another thing I read was that he also decided to do the Eastwood accent because of one of his co-stars, who we'll get to in a minute, because he had been in several Westerns with Clint Eastwood. So, but Russell was the one who suggested that his character should wear an eye patch. He did have to remove the eye patch between takes, as wearing it constantly seriously affected his depth perception, which I'm sure that's true.
Yeah, I was like, how many days into filming did he go, why did I suggest this?
Right. And a few things I read said he was like a very last minute thing. Like the first day of shooting, he put it on and didn't even tell Carpenter, and was like, we're going to do this. And so Carpenter's like, all right, go for it.
Yeah, I say, I'm sure at some point on like day 3 or 4, he was like,
bad idea.
But we've gone too far now. We can't.
Right.
We can't go back.
Right. Exactly. I guess why you don't see him running too much with the eye patch. Like it's more kind of walking. Yeah. So we've talked about Kurt Russell. I've already done several of his movies already, so I won't go too much into his filmography. But we've already mentioned The Thing. We've mentioned Big Trouble in Little China. Of course, he did comedies in the 80s as well, like Used Cars, Overboard, Tango and Cash. He went into more drama in the 90s with Backdraft, Tombstone, Stargate, Executive Decision. And of course, he's still working today. So one of my favorite actors for sure. One of the most prolific and can play so many different types of characters. Like he's great in drama. He's great in action. He's great in comedy. I've said it before. I'll say it again. He's just one of my favorite actors just because he can play it all.
Well, he's consistent. Like,
yeah.
He never, I mean, he might be in a bad movie, but generally speaking, he's not the problem.
Right, exactly. He has stated this was his favorite of all of his films, and Snake Plissken is his favorite of his characters. The name Snake Plissken was actually taken from a real person. When writing the screenplay, John Carpenter struggled over assigning a memorable name to his main character. A friend of a friend suggested using the name of someone he knew in high school, who he described as a sort of a tough guy, who bore a large snake tattoo on his abdomen. The last name was Plissken and went by the name Snake. So Carpenter said, anybody with a snake tattooed on them someplace, that's my kind of hero. Even though I will say the snake tattoo on Kurt Russell is the most fake looking tattoo I've ever seen on film.
100%.
I don't have any tattoos, but I've seen enough. I mean, there's guys in the movie with real tattoos. Then you put them next to Kurt Russell. It's like, it would not be that dark. It would not be that pronounced, as you know.
As the owner of one tattoo, yeah, it was pretty glaring. it was pretty glaring how obvious that was not a real tattoo.
Mm-hmm. Any thoughts about Kurt Russell as a whole or in the movie?
Like I said, he's consistent. I mean, Tombstone, probably one of my all-time favorites.
Absolutely, hands down. Yeah,
I was rewatching Gilligan's Island recently. I was because on lunch I have access to like a Roku at work.
Yeah.
And one episode, a Jungle Boy shows up, and I'm like, "Is that? No, that can't be." And I looked it up. It's one of his first roles. Like
I believe it.
He was Jungle Boy on an early episode of Gilligan's Island. He was one. He was very young.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so that's how long That's how long he's been around.
Yeah, if you go back and try to find some of those really old, and I think they have a few of them on Disney Plus now, but some of those old Disney movies that he was in, I mean, he was really young, and I think I'm trying to remember the name of the movie that him and Goldie Hawn are in, where she's like a dancer, and I think he has like a really small bit part, but he was only like 15 or 16, I think, at that time. So I mean, they're both like, I mean, look like teenagers for sure.
I would say when you say Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell, I immediately think of one of my dad's favorite movies and go Overboard.
Oh yeah.
I've
got to cover that one soon. That's one that's a lot of fun. That's just a fun movie to watch. All right, moving down the list with the cast, we've got Lee Van Cleef as Police Commissioner Bob Hawke. He appeared in over 170 film and television roles in a career spanning nearly 40 years, but is best known as a star of spaghetti westerns, particularly the Sergio Leone-directed Dollars trilogy films For a Few Dollars More in '65, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly in '66. In 1983, he received a Golden Boot Award for his contribution to the Western film and television genre. So that's, of course, the actor I was mentioning, that why Russell decided to do the Clint Eastwood homage to Clint Eastwood, was because he knew he was going to co-star with Lee Van Cleef. So
Lee Van Cleef is one of those, like, yeah, I know about, but his movies tend to be on the older side of things. Other than The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, like I'm sure I've seen a lot of his stuff, but that's the one that comes to mind immediately. That Primus song. Primus had a song called Lee Van Cleef. Yeah,
it's such an interesting name. Yeah, and that's something like I would definitely recognize the name, and I think I've seen him in some other things, like just really small, like bit parts. And like, okay, I think I should know who this guy is. But then if you've ever seen that one scene from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, where they're all the eyes are, shifting back and forth, that's clearly him. And so you're like, okay, that's the guy. So, that's probably his most famous role for sure.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. He actually flew in from Los Angeles for a one-night shoot and flew out the next day. When Carpenter watched the dailies, he discovered that some of Van Cleef's close-ups were out of focus. Carpenter was forced to use some of them since they couldn't afford to get the actor back. Van Cleef had also suffered a knee injury prior to filming and wasn't fully recovered when it came time to film his scenes, which is why he spends the majority of the film sitting down or leaning on things while standing. His wife was on set to make sure the actor could get through his scenes, especially those that required him to walk and talk. Carpenter recalled Van Cleef telling him the tracking shot of Hawk and Snake walking down a hallway was the most difficult part of the shoot for him.
Just walking down the hallway, that knee injury must have been pretty bad.
Moving on, Ernest Borgnine as Cabby. Borgnine's film career began in 1951, included supporting roles in From Here to Eternity in 53, Bad Day at Black Rock in 55, and The Wild Bunch in 69. He also played the unconventional lead in many films, winning the Academy Award for Best Actor for his role in Marty in 1955. He was also the title character in the sitcom McHale's Navy from 62 to 66 and co-starred as Dominic Santini in the action series Airwolf from 84 to 86, which I remember that show being on on TV. So he was also known as the original voice of Mermaid Man on SpongeBob SquarePants from 99 until his death in 2012. So
yeah, I mean, he's another one of those guys that's just been around forever, so it's hard to, like, oh yeah, that's Ernest Borgnine, and he looks the same in almost everything. So it's
yeah. And it's like, in really looking at his filmography, like I felt like I'd seen him in more things, and maybe he has been in like really small things, maybe more television. But he's just one of those guys, like that's Ernest Borgnine. When you see him, you know who he is. Probably my favorite casting of the movie, Donald Pleasance as President John Harker. He began his career on stage in the West End. Of course, we talked about him in the Halloween movies, so I'm going to skip all that. most known for playing Dr. Samuel Loomis in the Halloween movies. We've covered all of them from the 80s. The Prince of Darkness is the other John Carpenter movie from the 80s and 87.
Okay.
So he played a priest in that one. It's said that Donald Pleasance drew on his own wartime experience as a prisoner of war for his performance as the imprisoned president. What I know you wanted to get to was, although appearing as president of the United States, Donald Pleasance still retains his unmistakable British accent. According to John Carpenter, Pleasance, possibly feeling self-conscious, suggested the script include a backstory to explain this glaring constitutional faux pas. He came up with the idea of the dystopian United States having rejoined the British Empire, in which case the president no longer needed to be a natural-born citizen. Carpenter thought the idea was interesting, but would be both distracting and unnecessary to the story, instead opting to simply ignore the accent.
Well, and at some point he tried to adopt an American accent.
Yeah, it kind of goes in and out. Yeah.
But like when he first shows up on screen and he talks, you're like, wait, the president is British?
Right.
It was just like, okay, all right. I mean, it's dystopian, so whatever. Like,
yeah, I mean, it's logic. Who needs logic? Just, go with it. But yeah. It's 1997, man. Anything can happen,
Logic over cool wins every time.
Every time.
I think that's a conversation that we've had before.
Yes. Thank you, Jerry D, for bringing that one to us. All right, and then we've got Isaac Hayes as the Duke. Of course, Isaac Hayes is a well-known musician in the 70s. He was featured in the film Shaft and Truck Turner. He also had a recurring role in the TV series The Rockford Files as an old cellmate of Rockford's. In the 80s and 90s, he appeared in numerous films. This one, most notably, he also was in I'm Gonna Get You Sucker in 88, Prime Target 91, Robin Hood Men in Tights in 93, as well as in episodes of The A-Team and Miami Vice. He joined the founding cast of Comedy Central's animated TV series South Park. He provided the voice of the character of Chef, the amorous elementary school lunchroom cook, from the show's debut on August 13th, 1997, 1 week shy of his 55th birthday, through the end of its 9th season in 2006.
What are you going to say about him other than, Shaft?
Yeah. And he was decent in this. I liked his little eye twitch. I don't know what that was really supposed to be, but at least it was consistent through the movie.
I don't really know, other than Kurt Russell, if anybody knew what they were doing in this movie. But
okay, let's get through. We'll get through the cast and we'll talk a little bit more about it. These will be pretty quick. We got Harry Dean Stanton as Harold Brain Hellman. We talked about him in the Christine episode, so I won't rehash that. Adrienne Barbeau as Maggie, which we talked about her in our Creep Show episode. Also, we talked about her in the Swamp Thing episode with Laramie. So she's been in, a couple things. Tom Atkins as Captain Ramey. Of course, I know him best from Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, which we chose not to cover on the podcast because we just couldn't get through it. He was also in Creep Show, Night of the Creeps, Maniac Cop. Of course, he's in Lethal Weapon, the eggnog, the bullet through the eggnog as he's holding it.
Yeah.
So he's been in a couple of movies. And then we've got Charles Cyphers as a Secretary of State. I only mentioned him because he's known for his work with John Carpenter, especially as the role of Sheriff Lee Brackett in Halloween, as well as Halloween 2. And he even came back for the 2021 sequel, Halloween Kills. So anything to add about any of those I just covered?
Well, when you get to The Fog, you will be talking about Tom Atkins again.
Yes, we will. That's right. Yeah. I'll wait till we get there because I have some thoughts, but we'll wait till that episode to talk about it. Do you know who the voice was in the opening narration of the movie, of the computer's voice?
Oh, was it Jamie Lee Curtis?
It was Jamie Lee Curtis. Points to Nicholas. Good job. I want to say she was the voice of the recording he listened to in The Thing as well. So she's, one of those, I made you famous, so you're going to be in my movies no matter what.
Well, I mean, people like to give like Tarantino or James Gunn or Kevin Smith a hard time for always working with the same people, but clearly, like John Carpenter works with the same people a lot.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I think one thing he mentioned about one of the reasons why he wanted Russell instead of someone like Charles Bronson or Chuck Norris is because he was still kind of a new director. He didn't want a more seasoned actor to come in and like try to take over the set or try to implement too many ideas. So I could see him wanting to work with people that he knew he could collaborate with or would let him do his thing without too much,
yeah. I mean, I get it. I mean,
yeah, it's hard to think about, I've seen the more recent interviews with John Carpenter. So think of him as a young guy, like just up and coming is just kind of funny thinking about him that way. So, but kids probably say the same thing about us. You guys were in high school? Yeah, just Austin. The film originally opened with Snake and an accomplice named Taylor robbing the federal depository and ultimately getting captured, with Taylor being shot dead by the police. This is the crime Hawk notes Snake is being sent to New York for. Test audiences found the scene overlong and confusing, leading to its removal. It was later included as a deleted scene on the DVD. Joe Unger, who played Taylor, is still listed in the end credits, though. So, nothing really about Joe Unger. He wasn't like a big actor, but I give him his due for at least being in the movie without being in the movie. So, anybody else in the cast you want to talk about? I know there are a few that guys, but they were not listed. They must have been uncredited, so I couldn't find out their names.
There wasn't really anybody who jumped out. The only thing that jumped out at me was in the beginning when they were running through the credits. It said like introducing or also like somebody named, was it Susan Hundley or Susan Headley?
Yes, we'll get to her in a second. Yes.
Okay, yeah, to say she had a special credit, and I was like, I had to look her up to see why, but I was like, okay, yeah, I'd never heard of her before or since. So
we'll just go ahead and say she was married to Kurt Russell at the time. She'd only done a few other movies, but Adrienne Barbeau was married to John Carpenter at the time. So yeah, but she played the woman in the abandoned store who asked for a cigarette from Snake. So that's who Susan Hundley was.
There wasn't really anybody that stood out to me like, hey, it's that guy, so.
Yeah, and I could be just thinking it was somebody that it wasn't, but one of the like homeless bum guys that he finds before he gets to the guy who he thinks is the president, who's like sitting down on the floor. I want to say that was like Blue from Old School.
Maybe, but I didn't bother to look that up. So.
Yeah, I didn't. Like I said, he wasn't listed, so. And then there was another guy that was behind him, but I don't remember. It was the guy that was running down the street, like banging on the sewer heads. I want to say that was the same guy that's in Weird Science. That's the like the bald-haired, weird-looking guy.
Maybe.
But once again, it was hard to really see, so it was like it looked kind of like him. But once again, I couldn't find them listed in the credits, so I didn't dig too much. But those would have been some that guys. I would have been like, oh, there's that guy, if they had more screen time, maybe.
Yeah.
Normally here we would go to iconic and favorite scenes. Do we have any iconic or favorite scenes for this movie?
The closest thing I could come up with for an iconic scene was the fight with the big guy.
Yeah.
But
Ox, I think his name is.
Yeah. But yeah, there wasn't. I mean, like I said, the poster is more iconic, and that didn't come from the movie at all.
Right.
I mean, I know sometimes you'll see a trailer and then like come out of the movie like, where was that scene from the trailer? But this is one of those like, where was the scene from the poster? Like,
while you're there, I'll read this little bit of trivia. So, first of all, this was the first film to be shot on Liberty Island beneath the Statue of Liberty. The Liberty Island scene, along with the morning shot of Manhattan, where the helicopter scene, were the only scenes in the film shot in New York City. As you mentioned, the original lobby poster art for the film shows the head of the Statue of Liberty laying in the middle of a New York street, even though this is completely absent from the film and the statue is shown very much intact multiple times. But the 2008 found footage monster film Cloverfield, which involves an unseen force destroying New York City, actually did the poster and pays homage to Escape from New York by including a shot where the statue's head is lopped off and does actually wind up in the street. J.J. Abrams said, I loved that movie as a kid, but one of the things that drove me crazy is the poster had this picture of the head of the Statue of Liberty sitting in the middle of New York Street, but it was never in the movie, and I always felt that was such a crazy, scary image that it had to be in our movie.
I love Cloverfield.
Yeah.
But you'll never get to that because it's from 2008.
Yeah, not even close. But I do think that was cool that Abrams was like, he remembered that from the poster and was like, they didn't do it, so I'm going to do it. So more power to you.
Like I enjoyed the scene towards the end where they're driving the taxi cab and they hit a mine and the car literally like falls in
Splits
half.
in half, yeah.
But I enjoyed it because it was so stupid. Like it was just like you hit a mine and the car, like it was like they took a saw and literally cut it like perfectly in half.
Right,
like,
right.
And then everybody but Ernest Borgnine.
Yeah, how is he the only one that
right? The three
died?
people in the back of the car get out, no scratches, no cuts. I just it was of the many things in that movie that were ridiculous. That was towards the top, but it just because that scene just made me laugh. Like that's one of my favorite. And I mean, almost any scene with Ernest Borgnine because he was just such a
he was a good comic relief or good funny part of it.
But I mean, overall, like there wasn't really like a lot of like classic one-liners or quotable parts or memorable scenes. Like
it's interesting because all right, so I ask you this question. It's kind of listed as a cult classic. Would you define it as a cult classic?
I think I would.
Okay.
Because there is a following that it does have, but it didn't get the awards or the box office or that kind of stuff that a lot of like movies that wouldn't be considered. Like it doesn't have like great critical reception. Like it doesn't have a lot of negative that I can remember.
Yeah, it wasn't panned by critics, but it wasn't praised. It was kind of average. Most people thought it was a glorified B movie, which I think puts it in the level of like a cult classic because it's one of those that like it probably doesn't get shown on Saturday, TV a lot. It doesn't, you might have to hunt it down a lot more often. It's one of those things that comes up as like, hey, that Kurt Russell film from early in his career or early in his adult career. Right.
Kind of cool. Like if you ever seen it, let's watch,
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it's almost like the movie itself is fine. I'll just go ahead and say it. It's not my favorite John Carpenter movie. It's not my favorite Kurt Russell movie. It's not even in the top 5 or 10. It's okay. It's very slow. It takes a long time to really kind of figure out kind of what's going on. It's not as action-packed as I thought it was going to be in my mind before I watched it. But I think it's iconic because of the character that Kurt Russell gave us in Snake. Like, I think that's why it's popular because of Snake Plissken. Like that's the only reason that it has such staying power to me. Because he comes off as so cool. Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. And so let me think of the proper way to say this on a way that I can on your podcast. You can say it. I can bleep it out for you. Okay, badass. Yeah, I can say that. I can see that. Okay. I mean, he's such a badass in this movie that you're like, oh. Like, I mean, he's so like it kind of like his charisma kind of makes it where like a movie that like a lesser actor, this movie would have been forgotten and we wouldn't be talking about it. This, I mean, only reason people might talk about it or bring it up is because John Carpenter directed it. But in the hands of Kurt Russell, like it made it more enjoyable or more watchable. Oh yeah, for sure. Like, because really most of the beginning is just him walking around. Like, I think they said like he doesn't speak for like the first 18 minutes of the movie. Like, he doesn't say a word. So, but when he does, like, it's so like his presence really carries the movie. Like, just watching him walk around. Yeah, it's not action packed, but it still keeps you watching because you're kind of waiting to see what's going to happen next. Favorite scenes? Like, I don't really have an icon. Like, yeah, I think the poster is the most iconic scene that's not in the movie. It's like the poster is more iconic than any scene in the movie. As far as favorite scenes, nothing really stands out except maybe the ending. It does have an exciting ending, more exciting than I thought I was going to as we got there. Before we got there. So. Well, and I mean, the Duke's car is kind of cool in a ridiculous, like, why would you hang crystal chandeliers off the front of it? Right. But, you're kind of like, all right, I mean, in a world where you've managed to take one of the most valuable properties on the planet and turn it into a prison. Yeah. Why wouldn't you have a limo with crystal chandeliers hanging off the front? Sure. Why not? Works for me. Yeah. He almost gives me the vibe of was it Terry Crews as the president in Idiocracy? Yeah. So right, well, let's talk about scenes and trivia when we think about some other. I will talk about some deleted scenes and stuff that wasn't in the movie, which I think, we recently talked about director's cuts on another podcast. Some of this, I think, would have made the movie better, at least better story-wise. We'll get into that as we go. So the model of the city was repainted and reused for Blade Runner, which came out in 1982. So we can see that.
Makes sense. I mean,
yeah. I love this. Every character that says, "I heard you were dead" to Snake dies.
Yeah, and I paid attention to that this time, and I'm like, oh, because like somebody said something similar, but they didn't say, "I heard you were dead." It was like the one thing that did strike me as kind of weird is that somehow in this prison, and I don't know how long these people have been there, everybody knew who Snake was. Like everybody's like, "Hey, you're that guy.
Right.
You're a Snake." Like even the random woman who's like, "Hey, bum a cigarette." "Hey, you're Snake." Like everybody knew. And then like the one, like you said, the ones who said, "Hey, I thought you were dead," they ended up dying. But it was ridiculous. But like, I mean, the cabbie immediately was like, "You're Snake Plissken,"
Yeah. And like he talked like they had worked together, like they were old friends. Like it was like, yes, it was interesting. Also thought he was a little off. Like I think he was supposed to be a little mentally off anyway. So so we talked about the fight scene, which I thought was like the most what's the word I'm looking for? The most trope part of the movie was, you kidnap or you take into custody Snake, and he's obviously got to fight somebody for no apparent reason, just to have them fight in some kind of death match.
Right. But at least it made more sense than the basketball scene from Escape from LA.
I want to say I've seen Escape from LA, but I couldn't tell you anything about that movie.
Don't bother.
I remember it being pretty terrible. But Ox Baker is the guy that he fought in that scene. But it said he actually struck Kurt Russell very heavily with some of his blows during the boxing ring fight scene. Russell had finally had enough and asked Baker to take it easy, tapping him in the groin to let him know he was serious. Yeah. Baker then calmed down.
Speaking of that, guys, has Ox Baker been in other stuff, or is it just the beard kind of made him look like?
I didn't go back and look at it, but I was like, I think somewhere I read that he was a wrestler. Yeah, which I thought as soon as he came out, I was like, he had to have been a wrestler. He was known professionally as Ox Baker, an American professional wrestler and actor. He was famous for his distinctive eyebrows and finishing move, the Heart Punch, sometimes called the Hurt Punch, after Baker's famous catchphrase, "I love to hurt people." And that was in the 60s and 70s when he was at his height. So well before I was into any wrestling. So
yeah, absolutely.
But I thought this was interesting because I was like, this looked pretty real. For the shot where Snake kills Ox, Kurt Russell had to hit him with a real baseball bat with a real nail in it. Baker had special padding on the back of his neck to absorb the impact, but John Carpenter and Russell both mentioned in the commentary how nervous the pro wrestler was. I bet he was, because because you could tell he was hitting him pretty hard. I was like, wow,
and based on what you just said, there might have been a little extra behind it.
Yeah. After getting pummeled for days. Yeah. All right. So let's talk a little bit about cut scenes, different scenes. So one part of the screenplay that surprised everyone who read it was the reveal that Romero not only didn't kill Cabby, but that he traded away the president's tape because he liked Cabby's hat. So that Romero was like the weird, crazy haired, skinny guy that was the one kind of keeping watch of the president when Harry Dean Stanton and Adrian Barbeau get him. So, but he does make that comment about, nice hat. Where did you get it? So,
right. Yeah.
But they both assumed the tape was just music, which is why Cabby had it in his pocket before he handed it over to Snake. Even Frank Doubleday, who played Romero, had assumed that Romero murdered a lot of Duke's enemies off screen. So, but we know we can find out later that the Cabby dies in the cab. But that was interesting. In the original script, Snake Plissken, sorry, I say that wrong. In the original script, Snake Plissken wasn't given a reason, quote unquote, to destroy the tape as he does at the end, and did so because he said earlier he didn't care about the war or the president. The scene where Snake asked the president how he feels about the deaths of everyone in the rescue and is disgusted by the president's dismissive and empty words was crafted because it made Snake's action seem completely understandable, which helps because I kind of wondered I knew he had switched the tape. We've seen that trope so many times now. Yeah. But then for him to destroy the tape, it was like, what was the whole point? But at the same time, we really didn't really know what the tape was or what it was supposed to expose. It was still kind of mysterious anyway.
And I would say one of the biggest misses of the movie, and something that I think maybe would have made it a little better, was when Lee Van Cleef Hawk says, "Thought you were going to kill me," and he goes, "No, I'm too tired," and starts walking away. Right. I think it would have made it even cooler, or not cooler is not the right word, but even more, because he destroys the tape. Like if he just turned around and pulls a gun out of somewhere and shoots him, and then destroys the tape and walks away. Right. Yeah. And
then, he hasn't gotten that far away. You would think once they hear the music playing on the tape, they would have chased him down because he reneged somewhat on, why they were pardoning him and letting him go free. So, that was interesting. But so in 1981, Bantam Books published a movie tie-in novelization written by Mike McQuay that adopts a lean, humorous style reminiscent of the film. The novel is significant because it includes scenes that were cut out of the movie, such as the Federal Reserve Depository robbery that results in Snake's incarceration, which you mentioned earlier. The novel provides motivation and backstory to Snake and Hawk, both disillusioned war veterans, deepening the relationship that was only hinted at in the film. The novel explains how Snake lost his eye during the battle for Leningrad in World War III, how Hawk became warden of New York, and Hawk's quest to find his crazy son who lives somewhere in the prison. The novel fleshes out the world that these characters exist in, at times presenting a future even bleaker than the one depicted in the film. The book also explains that the West Coast is a no man's land, and the country's population is gradually being driven crazy by nerve gas as a result of World War III, which would then make sense of why they called them the crazies, the people that were, in the prison or whatever. So, which I kind of figured it had to have had some kind of chemical thing going on there. So, but I think some of those things that were left out could have added a little bit more context and made it a little better story.
Yeah. I'm honestly surprised, given that this film does have a cult status, and in the remake heavy era that we live in, we haven't seen Netflix or Prime or somebody pick it up and want to do an Escape from New York miniseries, where you can really flesh out all that stuff. Yeah, I know, and I don't know if you've got it in your notes, because I did look into some of the stuff after Escape from LA bombed, but they've tried a couple other times to do other sequels or a Snake
or reboots.
Reboots, and they've just all fallen apart. But in given how much money Netflix or Apple TV or Prime just throws at stuff, it wouldn't be outside. And it's not like this movie's so beloved that if they're we're going to remake it, people would be no, how dare you? I think most people would be maybe you.
There's going to be some. Yeah, there's going to be some. I mean, there's so much more you could do with it. I think Carpenter had a good kernel of an idea. I just don't think it was developed enough of a story to really give you enough to drive it story-wise. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I agree. I think if we did have more time to flesh out more which he didn't want to make it political, but it is somewhat political because he doesn't trust the president. Right. But why doesn't he? And kind of some of that backstory or whatever.
Well, and I don't know if it's 7 million in 1981 or it was 1981. Money and technology that goes along today would I think. I don't know. I mean, I say they couldn't have done it back in 1981, but I mean, look at what they did with a little more money on Star Wars, or next year with the same sets on Blade Runner.
Right.
Yeah. The 80s Flick Flashback Podcast will return after these messages.
Are you a fan of movies and TV shows inspired by comics? Ready for a podcast that dives deep into the thrilling world of adaptations? Well, look no further. Welcome to Moving Panels, the podcast where we discuss movies and TV shows based on, inspired by, and adapted from the world of comic books. This is your go-to podcast for all things comics on screen. I'm your host, Laramie Wells, and every Monday we explore the dynamic universe where ink meets action. We break down the classics, reveal hidden gems, and uncover the creative process behind your favorite adaptations. Subscribe to Moving Panels now on your favorite podcast platform and join us on this epic journey through the pages of comics and onto the big screen. Remember, new episodes drop every Monday. Don't miss out. Moving Panels, where every panel has a story, every adaptation is a blockbuster. Subscribe today, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.
Hey there, fellow 80s movie aficionados. Are you ready to embark on a nostalgia-filled journey to the greatest era of cinema? Then look no further than the Retro Life for You 80s Movie Podcast. Join us every week as we rewind the VHS tapes, dust off those Betamax classics, and dive headfirst into the neon-soaked, totally tubular world of the 1980s movies. From the Brat Pack to action heroes, we've got it all covered. Breakfast Club, Ghostbusters, E.T. and Indiana Jones, and more. It's like a trip in Doc Brown's time machine, but without the DeLorean. So whether you're a die-hard 80s film buff or just curious about the cinematic gems of the past, Retro Life for You is your ticket to the ultimate movie time warp. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Retro Life for You, and we can be found anywhere you listen to your podcast, as well as on our website, www.retrolife4u.com.
All right, well, let's talk about box office. Escape from New York was released on July 10th, 1981, the same day as The Fox and the Hound, which also featured Kurt Russell as the voice of Copper. There's a
diametrically
a tale of two movies that are not alike. The Fox and the Hound ended up at number 3 at the box office, just above Escape from New York at number 4. Neither new release could dethrone Superman 2 from the number 1 spot in its 4th week of release. But the film did end up grossing $26 million off a $7 million budget in theaters in the summer of 81. Worldwide, it grossed over $50 million. So it was a successful movie, even though it wasn't, heralded by critics or necessarily by audiences. But once again, it made good money, and it does still have that cult following, which once again I think is more because of the character of Snake Plissken than the movie itself. All right, so we're going to move to our newest feature on the podcast, the rewatchability and nostalgia meter. So if you're new to the show or you haven't listened to a new episode for this season, instead of talking about the critical reception, we're going to talk about where this falls on a scale of 1 to 10 on rewatchability and nostalgia. So to give you a range, a gauge, 1 would be I saw it once, that was enough. A 5 is a good rewatch every couple of years. 10 is highly rewatchable and full of nostalgia. You can pick any number between 1 and 10. So, Nicholas, where does Escape from New York fall on your rewatchability and nostalgia meter?
6.
Okay, yeah.
It's not bad, and I would rewatch it again, but it's not one like I'm going to rush or go out of my way to watch again.
Yeah.
It's got some problems. It's not, necessarily that great, but if somebody wanted to watch it, I'd be like, sure, why not? But it might be a couple years before I'm like, you know what, I really want to watch again.
Right. Escape from LA. I'm just kidding. Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think 6 is pretty on the nose. Like I said, I watched it maybe 5 years ago, and even rewatching it again today, there wasn't a whole lot that I remembered, and I think I'd want it to be that way. It's not something, like I said, there's not a lot of memorable scenes. There's not any fun one-liners. The one running thing is, I heard you were dead. That's the only thing that you kind of, pull from it. But it's not terrible. I like Carpenter as a director. I like Russell as an actor. It's got a pretty good supporting cast. You got people that we've seen in other things and we know about. So I think 6 is a solid number. All right. Well, letting me know about what's going on Pop Culture Roulette. What are you guys getting into here in the beginning of 2025?
Just, we're going back to some of our normal shows of just kind of picking a topic and talking about it, or just trying to stay somewhat relevant and topical. But I mean, basically just three guys sitting around talking nonsense.
It's what you're known for. I'm just kidding.
Absolutely. Well, I'm sure we haven't done one in a couple weeks, so I'm sure we'll do a bracket here pretty soon.
Yeah. Hey, March will be here before you know it. It'll be time. Another the season of brackets is upon us. So I'm sure it'll be coming pretty quick. So yeah, definitely go check out Pop Culture Roulette. Always a good time on their show. Look forward to having Nicholas back again. I know we'll have him on another show here in the not too distant future. Thanks for being a part of the episode today.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. All right, everybody, that's a wrap on today's episode. Thanks again for tuning in. I'm Tim Williams from the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast. Warm up the choppers. We're moving in.
We will run, where every day is just pure fun. Goonies never say die, they remind. In those films we lose our mind. And all his teen dreams, montages and simply themes. In Ferris hands, the city bends, living a life like it never ends.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.